remember in my early days being thrown by the odd nasty comment or negative commentary.
Man, she really wouldn't have liked the last 3 years then. Today, I'm going to be reacting to a few parts of Jacinda Ardern's final goodbye speech. And I say a few parts because it's 35 minutes long, and frankly, I don't want to spend that long talking about her. Now, as you all know, this week as well, Chris Hipkins, our current Prime Minister, who took over from Jacinda Ardern, was asked the question, what is a woman? Pretty simple question.
Those questions come slightly out of left field for me.
He couldn't answer it, but he did say one interesting thing in his reply. He
said, something that I've, pre-formulated an answer on.
Why do you need a pre-formulated answer, Chris?
But I wasn't expecting that question.
But what he means is that he has a huge team of publicists and speechwriters who help him with what he should say to the media. They help write his responses and make sure he sounds absolutely perfect. But the one thing that him and Jacinda don't have in common is the ability to manipulate people magnetically through speech. That was Jacinda Ardern's crowning glory. She was magnificent when it came to manipulating the public, as she has a background in publicity. She is on a completely different scale to Chris Hipkins, and you'll note that during this speech. Think about when she talks, the words that she says, and the emotion that she's trying to drag out of you. Now, we know that this woman does not show emotion outside of when she's trying to drag something very specifically out of the viewer or the listener. So I encourage you to keep an eye out for what you think she's trying to make you feel. And I'm going to react with what my thoughts and feelings are to this last part of her speech.
Most of you know my story. I don't consider myself to have had anything in my life that made me especially extraordinary.
Yeah, I can't really think of that much that she's done for New Zealand that's been especially extraordinary outside of extreme censorship of the media, extreme tyrannical measures when it came to COVID. Outside of that, I really can't remember much that she's done that has been extremely wonderful for our country. I mean, she's tanked the economy. Our gang rates have doubled under her reign. So yeah, no, she's pretty straight up and really honest with that first sentence.
I was a child of the 80s, born to the son of a drain layer and the daughter of a farmer.
She needs you to know that she's relatable, guys. She's just like you and me. Yeah, no, she didn't manipulate and lock down a country of 5 million unnecessarily, and in some parts with only one COVID case, in other areas, no cases at all. She's just your everyday farmer's daughter. Just keep that in mind when you're watching her speech. Relate to her because she's just like us.
My parents worked hard, really hard.
I'm sure they did, including her father, Ross Ardern, who was part of locking down families illegally in Tokelau to the point that they were never allowed to leave their property because they were unjabbed. For over a year, these families, including children, were not allowed to leave. Children were barred from school, and even when I helped send a laptop over to one of these young girls, they blocked it, and they would not let it get delivered to this family for her to continue online learning. So yeah, no, you're right. Your dad worked really, really hard, Jacinda. He did.
My father was a policeman. My mother ran the canteen at the local school.
Yeah, her policeman father actually did help raid everyday New Zealand families back in his beginnings as well. So lovely story for you there with Jacinda's dad.
They also ran an orchard for a few years, all while working full-time.
Oh, that's lovely. They were orchard farmers. Well, why does she keep trying to screw farmers over now then? Who knows?
I'm sensitive. Or as Maggie Barry once called me, a precious petal.
Oh, so she says she's sensitive and a precious petal. Is that why she needed to control the media's freedom of speech to maintain that she was perpetrated in a good light? Is that why? Because she's a precious petal and a sensitive person, so she needs to manipulate others into also seeing her God complex and making sure that the public see it as well, so that we can react in the way that we should by making sure we never say anything negative about her or her caucus. Because that's the kind of leadership we've had over the last 3 years.
I remember in my early days being thrown by the odd nasty comment or negative commentary.
Man, she really wouldn't have liked the last 3 years then. This is narcissists. They don't like when you call them out for their behaviour, and she hates being accountable. She will never apologise for how she's treated New Zealand. She will never apologise for the divisive nation that she's created. She won't apologise for the fact that we've not seen one positive uptick in our statistics. But she doesn't like negative comments. Now you know why she's fighting so hard to regulate the internet. And I say that because her job straight out of leaving here is working for the Christchurch Cool. And what is the Christchurch Cool trying to do? It's trying to regulate free speech online. And they're calling it violent extremism. But they're calling it violent online extremism. Because if they were violent extremism, then she'd actually have to take management of the gangs here in New Zealand. And we know she doesn't want to do that because she'd rather pay them out millions of dollars. So rather than looking at real violent extremism, she's going to internet violent extremism. But what you see here and what we've seen in New Zealand over the last 3 years is her version of violent extremism is not the same version of violent extremism that you and I would say. So we would say that horrible death threats, people looking to actually action these things, that would be violent extremism. Jacinda Ardern sees violent extremism as speech she doesn't like. And you can refer back to her Harvard speech for reference on this as well. We've had multiple OIAs that show dangerous extremism to them, to people like her, and I say like her because she's paid groups like the Disinformation Project who say that extremist right-wing ideas like the nuclear family, which is just the mum, the dad, and children, and we've got other OIAs that back up that same reference. So when they talk about violent extremism, and when Jacinda talks about violent extremism, she's saying ideas that come from the centre or centre-right that she doesn't like. She's not going to be running out there trying to shut down any trans activists that punch old ladies in the face. That's not the kind of violent extremism that she's interested in, just so you know.
I even went to Trevor Mallard for advice on how to harden up.
Oh, right, yeah, the Trevor Mallard that just abuses people, right? Yeah, no, that does seem like the kind of advice you got, actually, and you took it on board pretty darn well.
I thought that I would need to change dramatically to survive.
But turns out she didn't need to change at all because she already was horrible to people. And I can say that very, 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 very easily. Jacinda Ardern decided to lock down huge portions of our country, such as the entirety of Northland, for 0 COVID cases. And she knows that that's going to have an impact on mental health. She knows that has an impact on education. She knows it has a drastic impact on people that are stuck in domestic violence situation. And she doesn't care because what they said and what she said was it was to help boost vaccine numbers. So she didn't care about locking down people unnecessarily and illegally. She was happy to do that as long as it boosted vaccine numbers later on. And even with the first lockdown, it was ruled in court that that first lockdown was illegal. And what does she do? The very next day, she changes the law because she's got the majority and she can. That's the kind of dangerous extremism that Jacinda Ardern brought into our country because of her ideology.
I didn't change. I leave this place as sensitive as I ever was.
So not at all then. You're just a rock, just a boulder with eyes. And maybe that's too harsh of me. I'm sure she does have feelings and emotions just like any other person. However, she managed to sit and ignore tens of thousands of protesters that came into Wellington over a 3-week period and deem that they were second-class citizens and not worthy of being listened to. She managed to ignore millions of voices that were screaming online saying, this is not right, we are not happy with this. She managed to ignore so many people, and it takes an extreme personality to sit there and go, you don't matter. This massive group of human beings does not matter to me because I disagree with them. Now, I don't know about you, but I could not personally sit there and see tens of thousands of people clearly hurting that needed to be listened to and go, can't be bothered because I'm just too sensitive and too kind, so they don't mean anything to me because my sensitivity and my kindness mean that I feel nothing at all for them. And instead what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and berate them any opportunity I get, make sure I ignore them, make sure I gaslight them and bully them and try and convince them to go and get more things put in their arms because I said so. And then at the moment they disagree with me, I'm going to label them and make sure the media labels them and silence them from having a voice online because that, my dear, is true kindness, right?
Prone to dwell on the negative, hating question time so deeply that I would struggle to eat most days beforehand.
Guys, question time was so difficult because that involves accountability for my actions and I hate that more than anything else and so therefore I did not eat. It's like, well, okay, so you're saying you have an eating disorder. That's, again, relatively concerning. I think everyone should be eating healthy options. But what you're saying is Question Time made you that concerned because you were going to be asked questions that you didn't already have the answers to. You're going to be put on the spot, or you're going to be held accountable for your choices. No one should hate Question Time. You should embrace it. You should be like, hey, I am an open and honest politician, and I'm going to give you the answers that the public are wanting, because that matters to me and integrity matters to me. You should embrace that. That should be a highlight for you, being able to actually genuinely interact with the public, tell them what's going on, have open conversation, and build community and build relationships with people. But no, rather than that, we'd rather just avoid it completely, because it's really just getting in the way of what we want to achieve, right? Niggly questions and things.
And I'm here to tell you, you can be that person and you can be here. I am a crier and a hugger. It's instinctive to me. I remember...
Right, she's a crier and a hugger, guys. But if you're unvaccinated, you should jump off a cliff because, ew, gross, not going near you. Yeah, but if you're a grown man with your full genitalia intact and you want to run into a little girl's changing room, then I will embrace you and cry with you, because that is your God-given right as a grown man, to be anywhere you like with little children and do whatever you like, and I will embrace you and I will cry with you and I will feel your pain. But if you're unvaccinated, I will push you off a cliff because you mean nothing to me. This is Jacinda Ardern, by the way. You mean everything to me.
Going into the aftermath of Whakaare and seeing a comment about how I was just going in to hug people again. It stuck with me. So much so that when a first responder who was emotionally telling me about their experience, I had an internal argument with myself as to whether I should comfort them when I knew I would likely be criticised. I would rather be criticised for being a hugger than being heartless. And
What? Okay, so she'd rather be a hugger than be heartless, but you were heartless. But this is interesting because she talks multiple times about comments and people's negativity towards her. So she needs her ego built up by positive comments and endless positive comments because she cannot look bad to the public. And I think that this is exactly why what happened at Parliament really did destroy her, because she was heartless towards people and people destroyed her online. She lost the hearts of the public. They just disappeared overnight. And so I'm not surprised that this absolutely crushed someone that is narcissistic and needs their ego stroked constantly, because she wasn't going to get it ever from that group of people that she so heartlessly destroyed emotionally, spiritually, and financially for years.
now I cannot determine what will define my time in this place.
I can. I know what will define your time in this place. You have been the most divisive Prime Minister our country has ever seen. New Zealand was not like this 6 years ago. 6 years ago, when she was elected, New Zealand was not like this. But it's grown to be like this because what she has done is she has framed two classes of society. She said this herself over the mandates, but it's more than that. It's very much more than that. Her two classes of society involve everyone that she deems is acceptable with the ideology. So leftist, Marxist ideology, those are the people that are accepted in Jacinda Ardern's world. Anybody that is centre or centre-right is unacceptable, river of filth, according to Michael Wood, one of her MPs. But that is actually how she does see things. So because of that division, she creates a rhetoric and puts people around her in an echo chamber to reinforce that rhetoric. So all she sees is dangerous, terrible extremists and everyone else who's reasonable and good. And because she's been funding the media, the government's been funding our media, because of that, they reinforce that same message. She's never asked for any information on left-wing radical extremism here in New Zealand. It only goes to what is on the right side of politics, because that to her is the enemy. So she has created two classes.
But we don't see it like this. There's two different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is. So, yep.
And then she says, I'm a loving, thoughtful, caring person. And she probably does believe that, but it's only for the group that she finds acceptable. Now, one of the people she hired said they think that there's 2 million people in New Zealand that have interacted with violent extremists online. 2 million people, that's half the voting population, which is effectively anybody that might be a centrist in New Zealand. So is it violent extremism they're interacting with, or is it thoughts and ideas that she doesn't like? Yeah.
But I do hope I've demonstrated something else entirely, that you can be anxious, sensitive, kind, and wear your heart on your sleeve. You can be a mother or not. You can be an ex-Mormon or not. You can be a nerd, a crier, a hugger. You can be all of these things. And not only can you be here, you can lead.
Yeah, you could, but someone that's all of those things isn't her. So if you are all of those things and you're sitting at home, you absolutely could lead the country. But even though she's saying all these words and she wants you to believe them, they aren't true. And we can see that in her history of leadership. She was not honest in this last speech, and she's not been honest during her entire reign as Prime Minister. And she'll continue to be dishonest. She'll go into her role as a special envoy of the Christchurch coup, and she'll continue to say that they're just looking for violent extremism. Meanwhile, they will start censoring people that they disagree with. It's her, it's President Macron of France, and it's Justin Trudeau of Canada. They're all Marxists, they all think the same way. So you've got these three people working with companies like Google and YouTube, or who owns YouTube, and Meta with Facebook and Instagram. You've got these massive social media companies that are all jumping on board to let her tell you what you are and aren't allowed to think. And as we know, through 3 weeks of protesters being assaulted daily by police, she doesn't care. So she will not care when your voice is being silenced. She will empower people to make sure you are silenced, because her heart and her kindness is only for those people that she deems acceptable. It's not for anybody else. And that's Jacinda's legacy here in New Zealand. You're either with me or I'm against you. Sound familiar?
Just like me. Lord Ada.
And you should cry, just like me. And notice she doesn't actually cry. She never sheds a real tear. You never see her actually well up, but she is extremely emotionally manipulative with her voice. And she will make you think that she will nearly cry, but she won't be, because it's just PR, it's just publicity, it's acting, which she's incredibly good at. And she could really give Chris Hipkins a few more tips, because he seems actually a little bit too honest for his own good.
Tina koutou, tina koutou, tina koutou koutou.
And still not a real tear to be seen. Okay, I'm good.